Hey, what's up everyone? So in this video, we're going to talk about 5 awesome programming languages that's good to know this brand new year, 2021. And then we're going to talk about how these lists ultimately don't matter that much, and it's all about languages that are relevant to you. So let's check them out. All right, folks, so to start off, I want to mention that I'm going to be listing my top 5 languages to learn for 2021, going backwards, starting from number 5 to number 1, all right? And for number 5, we have C#. And C# has been around for quite some time. I personally have had most of my career writing in C#, so I'm a little biased and made sure that it got on the list. I've never really had any issues finding work with C#. C# has been a language that I've always considered like Microsoft's version of Java. They looked at Java, see what it was doing right, and then made a better version of it. But they've recently gotten good in the gaming industry, and that includes virtual reality games. For number 4, Java. Java is also popular in the business world for building web applications, desktop applications, and scientific applications. And it was really famous because it was able to be run on different platforms. And that was like the great thing that it brought to the programming world. Also, if you're going to be learning programming and covering some high concepts such as design patterns, oftentimes those type of books and resources are written with programs that are in Java. And so that's one reason it's really good to be familiar with Java. For number 3, I have Python. Now, Python is a language that has become very popular in the past few years. And one of the things that some people will often say about it is that it's an easier language to learn. I mean, it still runs deep, and you can do any complicated thing with Python like any other language, but the syntax itself and the way that you write the code is a little bit friendlier on the eye. It's just more like English. Now, in areas Python is pretty popular in is the data science space. And I think that industry has had a big boom lately, which has helped increase the popularity of Python. Now for number 2, which some of you may be surprised that I'm mentioning this, but is SQL, Structured Query Language. Now, when people think of programming languages, they don't think SQL usually, even though it's in the name as a language. But I put it here because it's often underestimated how important it is when you're preparing and learning as a programmer to get jobs, because oftentimes questions regarding databases come up in interviews. And no matter what type of programmer you are, ultimately your programmer is going to be using some type of data source, and most likely it's going to be using SQL. So it's incredibly important, no matter what language you ultimately choose to learn, to accompany it with knowledge of SQL. Now, it may be that you're using something else that is referred to as NoSQL, but nonetheless, most of the industry right now is using SQL, so this is good to know. For number 1, I have JavaScript. JavaScript used to be a small-time punk back in the day. Used to add some interactivity on HTML, on the World Wide Web as they used to call it. But now it is a full-fledged language, and it follows principles like any other language, and it runs deep. It's a monster, and it's nothing to people look up. You could have a whole career just knowing JavaScript. And the thing about JavaScript, it's a little bit harder, I think, than other languages to learn because it's much more cryptic. It's basically like the opposite of Python. I was saying Python was friendlier. Well, JavaScript is not. It is more cryptic to learn. But once you get comfortable with it, it's not a big deal. And in fact, TypeScript is often mentioned on some lists as a language, but TypeScript itself, I kind of just see it going hand in hand with JavaScript. It was created to do the work of JavaScript in a manner that is more like a regular programming language. When you hear about frameworks like React or Angular, all those single page application frameworks, you got to know JavaScript inside and out to really understand using those. So this is one of the reasons I put JavaScript as number one. It's everywhere on the internet. There's no website that's not using JavaScript. So whatever you choose to learn, if JavaScript is not going to be your forte, make sure you at least understand it to an amount where you can comfortably pass an interview with it. But I would strongly recommend making it one of your strongest skills. Know JavaScript as well as you know any other languages. But I do want to mention, ultimately, these lists are not too important. What's most important is for you to ask yourself, what is it in programming that you want to do? What's the area? So if it's in gaming, then on your list, C# may be the number one language you may want to learn. If it's building apps that are going to be on the iPhone, then Swift will want to be your number one language. So that's the perspective that you need to come from. In addition to paying attention of how many jobs are available with the languages. And all these that I mentioned, you won't have issues finding work. But if for some reason you did fall in love with the language that there's not too many jobs out there for, even that's not always a bad thing. Like, let's say COBOL, because the few jobs that are related to COBOL, well, those companies will pay a lot of money to have you as a programmer because there's not that many programmers doing it. All right? Now, I'm not suggesting to go learn COBOL, but that's just an example. Either way, whatever you decide will be just fine because we're in a great field and the job market has been constantly growing. So if you're good at any of these languages that we mentioned, you will do great. All right, so hope you guys enjoyed that. My next video is going to be about job searches and my favorite website that I use for it. And I'll also talk about some tricks that I use to filter out crappy jobs and focus on just the quality ones. So you'll want to check that out. And to do so, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. But I do want to ask you guys, if you have questions or topics that you'd like me to cover, mention it in the comments and I'll start doing that too. I have ideas of videos I want to do in the future, but want to get your feedback. So that's it, and we'll check you out in the next one.